way.
Oh, the Jesus way.
Is the way of peace.
Is the way of peace.
Oh, the Jesus way.
Oh, the Jesus way.
Is the way of peace.
Is the way of peace.
Oh, the Jesus way is the way of peace. When he is king, all wars will cease. May his peace begin with me. Gonna beat my sword.
Gonna beat my sword
Into a plow.
into a plow.
Gonna beat my sword.
Gonna beat my sword
Into a plow.
into a plow.
Gonna beat my sword into a plow. Christ is king in my life now. May his peace begin with me.
The Church of the Brethren traces its roots back to August of 1708 in Schwarzenau, Germany, and so do the Conservative Grace Brethren International, Dunkard Brethren, Fellowship of Grace Brethren Churches, German Baptist Brethren, Old Brethren, Old German Baptist, Old German Baptist Brethren, the Conservative Grace Brethren. Do you get the picture? There are actually 11 different churches that developed out of Alexander Mack's original group of 8 who first baptized each other in the Eder River in Schwarzenau, Germany. 300 years of history have gone by, and some brethren felt that some of the historical information and artifacts should be preserved. With this Brethren Voices program, we're going to go back into history. And to help us do that are Gail Honeyman and Larry Heisey. The Brethren Heritage Center of Brookville, Ohio is where it's happening. Gail Honeyman and Larry Heisey are the co-directors. Larry and Gail, can you first of all tell us how it all began?
A few of us, Don Bowman and Fred Benedict and I, were standing at an auction in about the year 2000, I think it was, watching some Brethren things being sold, and we commented to each other that here in the middle of the Miami Valley, where there's such a rich Brethren heritage, there's no place that's collecting these Brethren artifacts and the history of the Brethren. Wouldn't it be neat if all the different Brethren groups could work together to preserve our common heritage? Those of us that trace our heritage back to the baptism in the Eder River in Schwarzenau, Germany in 1708 with Alexander Mack and 7 others. So that little spark led us to start thinking about that and talking to others and pulling together interested parties. And we finally were able to get the enough momentum going that we opened this center in 2003. The beginning of the collection was a collection that Don Bowman had been putting together since the 1970s, for the Southern Ohio group of the Church of the Brethren, Southern Ohio district of the Church of the Brethren. So that began a collection, and then Fred Benedict, an old German Baptist Brethren member, had also been collecting for the old German Baptist. And he didn't know what was going to happen to his collection when he no longer was able to care for it. So he was happy to add his collection to this collection. So those two collections together began what we have now in 2003. And almost every day somebody brings in something to add to the collection or come in to do research. We are actually a research center. We're not a lending library. We have way over 20,000 books in the collection, and primarily Brethren related, either genealogical or Brethren history, Brethren faith traditions.
Being in the Church of the Brethren, we sometimes forget that there have been many divisions down through the years. But your center actually works with all of the various Brethren groups.
Our board is made up of people from all of those different, almost all of those different Brethren groups, working together to preserve our common heritage. So we're unique in the world, and there's no place like this in the world specifically for the Brethren, where all the groups work together to preserve our common heritage.
How did you both become involved with the Brethren Heritage Center?
There are 11 groups that are part of the Schwarzenau Brethren who all descend from the original baptism in 1708. It's completely unique. We are the only organization within the Brethren fold that does represent all groups of the Brethren background.
I see that the Brethren Heritage Center has 17,000 square feet of area to work with. That's terrific. So can you give us an idea of what's going on there and how it's all organized?
Almost everything we have here has been donated. We operate strictly on donations, both items, books, and also monetary donations. And we have a total volunteer staff. Our staff consists of about 30 individuals, and we have thousands and thousands of hours donated every year to this effort of collecting Brethren heritage, both in terms of artifacts and manuscripts, photographs, and actual objects of Brethren connection and Brethren interest.
How did you both become involved with the Brethren Heritage Center?
Well, how I became involved was my interest in Brethren history, and being a member of the Church of the Brethren, it just was a natural draw. When I first learned of the organization, my immediate reaction was, yes, I want to be a part of it.
Both of us are originally members and continue to be members of the Southern Ohio District of the Church of the Brethren Historical Committee. So that led us immediately into this effort as well. Okay. And one of our major sponsors is the Southern Ohio District of the Church of the Brethren. In fact, we are the archive for the district now, as well as the Brethren home in Greenville. We have all of the collection from the Brethren Camp Woodland Altars that was recently sold, and many, many congregations use us as their archive as well.
For such a large facility, how is the Brethren Heritage Center funded?
Our funding comes from a few sources. Obviously, we make some money on the books that we sell here, both new and used books. We have what we call a Heritage Friend, sort of like a membership, that folks who donate at least $25 a year become a Heritage Friend, and then that entitles them to our quarterly newsletter, and also a 10% discount on those things that they buy from our bookstore. And then we have larger donors that donate as well, and we encourage that as well.
Of the items that are in your exhibits, what do you appreciate the most?
I enjoy the Love Feast items as much as anything, I guess, because it kind of gives us a sense of how Love Feast has changed over the years, and how the different groups have maybe added a little different angle or different interpretation of the Love Feast event. So it's unique to the Brethren pretty much. There are a few other groups that have Love Feasts, but the Brethren have probably focused on that more than any other group has.
Looking at your website, it's mentioned that you assist people with genealogy. What do you do to assist people in that way?
Well, first I ask the people who are researching who their first known ancestors are. And from that, then I'm able to go back into our rather extensive collection of books, genealogies on various families. And with the knowledge that I have, frequently I'm able to go into books that are not of the family name that they're looking, but their family happens to be in another genealogy of a different family name. Beyond that, we have many genealogical files, some of which have been collected by Don Bowman through the years. He has a very extensive collection. But there have been others who, through the years, have passed, and their heirs have donated their collections to us. It is a continually growing resource for us, because that's one of the purposes, is genealogy. But not only genealogy, it's also to let people know about our faith.
I assume that for those involved in the various Brethren church organizations, genealogy kind of goes together, or as they say, hand in hand, with their Brethren heritage.
After the center was formed, many folks started coming in, researching their families. And with my knowledge, I'm able to assist them. And usually, if they have an old-time brethren name, I can just about tell them who their grandparents and great-grandparents are without even going to a book to look. Usually they are curious. They know that their grandfather, grandmother was a Dunkard. And explain to us what Dunkard, what are you? What do you believe? So it gives us a chance to explain. Dunkard is an old term that we were once known by. It just simply refers to the fact that our baptism is trine immersion. And in the early years, we had no official name, so by outsiders, we were called Dunkards. Among ourselves, we were brothers and sisters in the faith. We did not have a name until 1836. It was brought to annual conference, or annual meeting as they called it in those years. What should we put on a deed when we are buying property for a meeting house? It was decided by the elders that our name would be Fraternity of German Baptists. In 1871, the name was changed again to German Baptist Brethren. And then for us in the Church of the Brethren, our name again was changed in 1908 on the occasion of our 200th anniversary.
There are so many wonderful exhibits in your collection. They don't just happen, do they?
No. Everything in here has been donated from one source or another. Some have come directly from churches, some have come from families. And I'd like to point out something. There's a cabinet directly behind me that in 1847, John Florey left Montgomery County here and took the Miami-Erie Canal up to Defiance County, Ohio. Once he was there, he built the cabinet that you see. It's unusual in that there is a drop leaf on the table, but there is not one in the back side. There never has been. The family was on the Underground Railroad, and when a runaway slave was in their home, they would house them in their cellar, and that cabinet was moved over in front of the door to ward off any slaver that might show up looking for a runaway.
That's an amazing story about the Underground Railroad.
It is, and it's a very little known fact that Brethren families participated in the Underground Railroad.
Larry told us about his favorite exhibit in the Brethren Heritage Center. Gail, what do you feel is one of the most meaningful for you?
Well, it's a very hard one. I'm partial to most everything in here. One thing that we have that's rather extraordinary, Christopher Sauer was an elder in the Germantown church, our mother church, and he also was a second-generation printer. His father in 1743 printed a German Bible, which was the first foreign language Bible printed in this country. Christopher Jr. in 1764 printed the second edition, and in 1776 printed the third edition. 2 years after he printed the third edition, he was arrested as a Tory spy. Not a spy, but actually it's a Tory, and which was not true. He had a newspaper, and in his paper he was talking against our involvement in the Revolutionary War. Not that he favored one side or another, but the fact that we're pacifist, that we did not believe that fighting a war would prove a fruitful end. His home and all the contents, his shop, were all confiscated by the revolutionaries and sold at public auction. Among the things sold there were sheets that he had printed for the Bible, which had not been bound. They eventually wound up in the hands of another Brethren elder, Peter Liebert, and we have 2 Bibles that were sold at the second auction, or at the auction, they are different in that some of the pages were not printed correctly and or were missing and had to be reprinted. The original 1776 edition has the name Germantown as the place of publication. Peter Liebert did not care for the term Germantown. He turned it back into the original German of Germantown. I think it's one of the extraordinary things that we have. Since we have two of them, they're very rare. So to have two in our collection is wonderful.
I understand that Christopher Sauer actually lived in the same city at the same time as someone else we all know, Benjamin Franklin, in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania.
Christopher Sauer did in German the same thing that Benjamin Franklin did in English. Almanacs and newspapers and Bibles and other books. They were competitors, so to speak, only one was English, one was German. And their constituency was pretty equal in numbers, German and English at that time in Pennsylvania. Well, of course, Benjamin Franklin was a contemporary of Christopher Sauer. Christopher Sauer had to buy his paper and ink from Benjamin Franklin, because Benjamin Franklin had the only source in the colonies. He wasn't bashful about charging a high price, so Christopher Sauer had to pay an inflated price to get the paper and ink. Benjamin Franklin had sort of a love-hate relationship with the Brethren. Benjamin Franklin was English, of course, and the Brethren were German. And Benjamin Franklin respected the honesty and the hard work ethic of the Brethren, but he also distrusted them in a way because they were German. An interesting sidelight is that in the early days of the Pennsylvania colony, it came before their legislature about what should be the official language of the colony. William Penn was very successful in recruiting Germans because they were good farmers and he had all that land he wanted to develop, and so he recruited a lot of German, a lot of them were Brethren, and it came before the assembly what should be the official language, and it passed by one vote that it should be English. It almost became a German colony, German-speaking colony. This is a display of some Brethren love feast items, a girding towel and a foot washing basin. Love feast is a central part of the Brethren tradition over the years and up into even today. Brethren came from miles around for love feast events when a congregation was having a love feast. It was not uncommon to have 1,000 or more show up for love feast, not just all close to the church, but they'd come from miles around and stay overnight. And many of the churches had upstairses that were sort of like dormitories for those that stayed overnight. So it was quite an event, a social event, and even in fact those who were not Brethren in the community would come also because it was such a large social event in addition to a sacred event of the love feast itself.
That was a very big group of people to feed. Where did they get all the food?
Yes, it is. It took a lot of food, and it was not just one meal, it was a weekend event. It would start on Friday all through Saturday and finish after worship on Sunday. So there were 2 nights of lodging and meals for all of those days provided by the local congregation provided it. Remember, they were all farmers. They all raised their food, so they all had sources of meat and vegetables and all the things needed to feed the large number of people that showed up. One of the important components of the love feast weekend in the congregation was the actual meat, the staple of the meal, and it was used for each of the meals, cooked beef. Almost every Brethren congregation, at least here in the Miami Valley and perhaps further, had at least one of these big cookers to cook the meat. And it would be cooked and then served in serving bowls, family style.
The deacons are the folks who cook the beef for Love Feast. The Love Feast itself consists of beef, sop, and there might be pickles and some coffee or water. And of course there was always bread. It was homemade bread, which the sisters would make. One of the local congregations, Ludlow, which is in Pittsburgh, Ohio, had a love feast scheduled. And the Saturday morning that it was to occur, the weather was very rainy. And it was torrents of rain coming, and the elders and the deacons thought there wouldn't be many people come for that particular love feast. As noon arrived, the weather changed and the sun came out, and the buggies started coming and coming and coming until there were more than 1,200 people for a love feast.
You actually have a horse-drawn buggy as another one of your exhibits. Tell us about that.
This buggy was in use up until a couple of years ago among the Old Order German Baptists, a group that is up in just north of us. They number about 150 members. They're much like the Amish. The buggy itself was in an accident, and so it was decided that it was not worth repairing, and someone bought it, restored it, and donated it to us. This buffalo robe is rather interesting. In the 1870s, Elder Joseph Flory left West Virginia and went to Colorado, and he wrote many articles that were published in our old periodicals, but he also advertised buffalo robes for sale. The buffalo robe was a very important ingredient in keeping warm. These buggies were pretty much air conditioned because the doors did not close tightly on them.
I don't know about you, but those buggies really fascinate me, and the Amish still use them today. I've actually seen them in Pennsylvania, especially in Lancaster County.
This is the boot of the buggy where foodstuff generally was placed as folks were going to meeting, and then they would share a common meal.
I also noticed that you have some other furniture in the exhibit.
All of this church furniture that we have on display here came from congregations that no longer exist. The table and benches here in the front were representative of how the church may have been set up in the early days. The elders and preachers would sit on this bench facing the congregation, and they would sit in the order that they were called or elected into the ministry. The oldest and the most tenure, one with the most tenure would sit here, and then it would be ever decreasing tenure down the line. And the deacons sit on the bench facing the elders, and usually the a cappella singing would be started by one of the deacons, and he would lead the singing a cappella. This is a wine set for Love Feast. The decanter would hold the wine, and then the brethren would use one cup and the sisters would use a cup for the sharing of the wine at Love Feast. It was wine until the temperance movement, and then the Church of the Brethren and perhaps others changed to grape juice. But some of the more conservative brethren groups still use wine in their Love Feast.
Can you tell us about the exhibit of Dan West and Heifer project, which most brethren hold close to their hearts?
Dan West was born about 20 miles north of our location, near Pleasant Hill, Ohio. He happened to be in Europe following World War II, and being a farm boy, he found that the farmers had no animals. And he came back to the United States with the idea of, can we send animals to Europe? He was in his local church. He had moved up to northern Indiana, and he stood in the pulpit asking the congregation that same question. And when his discussion was finished, one of the local farmers walked up to him and said, "Have faith." And that bantered back and forth between the two of them until finally the farmer said, "No, Dan, you don't understand. Have faith, my cow." Faith was the very first cow donated for the Heifer project, which is now Heifer International. Today, this is one of the most important ministries of humanity.
We also have a sizable collection of rare books. And if it's a rare book, we treat it a little different than regular books. We wrap it in an acid-free wrapper, and we put the spine label on the back of the wrapper instead of putting it on the book. And then we can open it to use it. This book is not in too good a shape, but the wrapper holds it all together.
The very rare and old books are so interesting. Is there anything you can tell us about the book you have just opened up?
1753 date in it. It's got some...
Thomas Clark and Margaret Scott was married October the 11th day, 1753.
That takes us a long way back, back before the Civil War. Absolutely intriguing. I've also heard that you have the complete collection of Brethren Voices, all of our community television programs. Right now that number's 127 in your collection. With this program, it'll be 128.
We do have, yes, and we treasure that. We're happy to have that here. That's another valuable addition to our collection. Almost every day somebody brings in something. It might be a book, it might be an artifact, it might be a box of books and artifacts, it might be several boxes of manuscripts or printed materials that are all Brethren related.
Gail Honeyman and Larry Heisey, thank you so much for taking time to be with us on Brethren Voices.
Thank you for having us. We've really enjoyed this day.
And thank you for checking out Brethren Voices. This is Brent Carlson, wishing you peace.
All those who tread the path he trod, all those who tread the path he trod, all those who tread the path he trod shall be called the friends of God. May his peace begin with